Let me tell you something you already feel but were never allowed to say. The person you want doesn't choose you for how good you are. They choose you for what you're worth. Not your heart, not your potential, your worth. The number the market quietly puts on you, coldly, every single day. You were raised on a nicer story. Love is connection, chemistry. Just be yourself, and the right one shows up. And there's a little truth in that, just enough to keep you from looking underneath it. But underneath the candlelight and the playlists and the endless talking stages, there's a machine running, a market, and every market has prices. Every market has supply and demand, and every market has winners and losers, most of whom never figured out which one they were. Most people spend their whole romantic life losing this market and die never understanding the rules. They blame their face, they blame the apps, they blame their luck, their city, the other gender, the whole economy of feelings. They blame everything except the one thing that's actually responsible, themselves, for refusing to learn the game they were already inside. And here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. The man who explained this market better than anyone never wrote a word about dating. He never sent a text. He never sat across a table waiting to be picked. He died in 1790. His name was Adam Smith. People think Adam Smith was an economist. He was something more dangerous. He looked at human beings honestly. He stripped away the story they told about themselves and described what they actually do. He watched butchers and bakers and merchants, and he saw the truth nobody wanted printed. People act out of self-interest. Markets organize that self-interest, and value isn't what something deserves. Value is what someone's willing to pay. Now, take everything he saw in the markets of his century and point it at your love life. Because the same forces are running right now, in your phone, in your conversations, in every room you walk into hoping to be wanted. If this makes you flinch, good. That flinch is an illusion cracking. And real change has only ever started in that exact moment. This isn't a small corner of your life either. The person you end up with shapes your money, your mood, your kids, your peace, the whole texture of the next 40 years. People will study how to make a living for 1,000 hours and never spend 1 hour studying the market that decides who they wake up next to. They treat the biggest negotiation of their life like weather. Something that just happens to them. It's not weather, it's a market. And a market can be learned, entered, and won by anyone willing to stop being romantic about how it actually works. What you're about to hear are the laws, not opinions, not tricks. The hidden rules that decide who gets wanted and who gets overlooked. Most people never see them. You're about to... Law 1. You're in a market whether you signed up or not. First thing that has to die. The fantasy that you're somehow standing outside all this. You like to think you're not being priced, not being ranked, not being compared. That somewhere out there is a person who'll see past everything and love you for nothing but your soul. That belief is the most expensive thing you own. Because the market doesn't care whether you're playing on purpose. It prices you anyway. Every glance that decides in a second and a half whether to keep looking, that's a transaction. Every message someone answers in 2 minutes or 2 days, that's a price. You're being valued constantly by everyone, including the people pretending not to look. And the apps made it obvious. They took the invisible market and put a number on it. A swipe is a price. A match is a bid. A reply is interest. Silence is a no. You can pretend the old world was different, that people fell in love by accident, that nobody was keeping score. The apps didn't create the market. They just turned the lights on and showed you the scoreboard that was always there. Adam Smith understood that a market needs no designer. Nobody sits in a room setting the price of bread. The price just appears. It comes out of thousands of small, selfish decisions. None of them coordinated, all of them building a number that feels like a law of nature. Attraction works exactly the same way. Nobody voted on what's desirable. It emerged from a billion private choices, and now it runs you like gravity. So stop asking the loser's question. Why won't they just see me for who I am? That question assumes the market owes you a reading it was never going to give. Start asking the player's question. What's my actual price right now? And am I okay with it? That second question is brutal. It rips the comfort right out. Because the second you admit you're a product in a market, you can't keep blaming the market for your results. You have to look at the product. That's exactly why people refuse to ask it. They'd rather feel undervalued forever than admit the value was set fairly. Being undervalued feels noble. It lets you believe you're a hidden gem the world was too blind to see. But Smith would have laughed at the idea of a hidden gem. In a market, nothing stays hidden long. If you keep getting overlooked, the market isn't blind. It's reading you accurately. You just don't like the number. I'll be honest with you. I lived in that comfortable lie for years. Told myself I was deep, misunderstood, that the right person just hadn't shown up yet. And the whole time, the market was sending me a clear, consistent signal I refused to read. My results weren't a mystery. They were a report card. And the day I stopped arguing with the grade and started fixing the work, everything moved. So, the first law is simple. You're in the market. You've always been in the market. The only choice you ever had was whether to play it on purpose or get played blind. And once you accept that, the next question shows up with teeth. What actually moves a price? Moves a price. Law 2. The invisible hand runs desire, and nobody's holding it. Adam Smith gave the world one phrase it never recovered from: the invisible hand. He used it for something that shouldn't work but does. Picture a city of strangers. None of them care about each other. Every single one is chasing their own advantage. By instinct, that should be chaos. Instead, somehow, the bread gets baked, the shoes get made, the city feeds itself. As if guided by an invisible hand, private selfishness produces public order. Nobody planned it. It happened anyway. Now look at attraction with those eyes. There's no authority deciding what's attractive. No rulebook everybody signed. And yet across millions of people who've never met, this eerie agreement forms about what has value and what doesn't. Confidence reads as value. Not caring about the outcome reads as value. Scarcity reads as value. Desperation reads as a warning. Nobody enforces this. Nobody teaches it. And yet it's enforced everywhere, by everyone, all at once. That's the invisible hand of desire. And it's squeezing you whether you feel it or not. Here's why this matters more than anything else I'll say tonight. You can't argue with the invisible hand. You can't write it a letter explaining you should be valued higher. It doesn't read letters. It reads behavior. It reads signals. It responds to what you actually transmit, not what you wish you transmitted. This is where the average person bleeds out. They spend all their energy protesting the hand instead of working with it. It's shallow that people respond to confidence. Maybe the hand doesn't care about your review of it. It's unfair that scarcity raises value. Sure, the hand will keep raising it anyway. You're arguing with weather. You'll lose, and you'll get wet. The strategic person does the opposite. They stop fighting the machine and start studying it. They ask what the hand rewards. Then they arrange themselves to get rewarded. Not by faking it, by understanding the hand reads signals and choosing which ones to send. And once you get that the hand reads signals and not intentions, a quiet panic sets in, because you realize you've been sending signals your whole life and never once checked them. The way you stand, how fast you reply, the desperation in an over-explained text, the relief that floods your face when someone finally pays attention. You thought you were hiding it. You were broadcasting it. The hand read you the entire time, accurately, and priced you on signals you didn't even know you were sending. That's the bad news. Here's the same fact flipped. If signals can go out by accident, they can go out on purpose. The hand can't tell the difference between a calm you stumbled into and a calm you built. It only reads the calm, which means the machine that's been working against you can be turned to work for you, with effort. And the deepest signal the hand reads is the one Smith built his whole system on: self-interest, which is exactly where most people get it backwards. Pause for a second, not to nod, to actually answer. Think about the last time you got rejected, ignored, Left on red, did you spend that energy cursing how unfair it was? Or did you ask, even once, what signal you actually sent? One word. In your head, were you arguing with the hand or reading it? Because that one habit, repeated over a lifetime, is the whole difference between the people who rise in this market and the people who complain about it until they vanish from it. Law 3. Self-interest isn't your enemy. It's the engine of every connection you'll ever have. Adam Smith wrote one line that survived 2.5 centuries because it's true in a way people hate. He said, "We don't get our dinner from the kindness of the butcher or the baker. We get it from their concern for their own interest. We don't appeal to their humanity, we appeal to their advantage. And out of that cold deal comes something warm, a meal, a relationship, a whole society that works." Most people approach dating like a beggar walking up to a saint. They show up needing, they offer their loneliness like it's a gift. Everything about their posture says, "Please pick me, because I want you so badly." And then they're shocked when the other person backs away. They backed away because you broke the one law that runs every voluntary exchange on earth. You appealed to mercy instead of interest. You asked to be chosen out of pity, and pity has never once, in the entire history of our species, kept desire alive. Smith's butcher doesn't sell you meat because he feels sorry for your hunger. He sells you meat because the deal is good for him. And that's exactly why the deal is stable. A connection built on someone's pity dies the second the pity dries up. A connection built on real mutual advantage stands, because both people are actually getting something they want. So here's the shift, and it's huge. Stop asking, "How do I get someone to want me?" That's the beggar's question. It broadcasts need like a siren. Start asking, "What do I actually bring that makes being around me an advantage?" That's the merchant's question. And the merchant never has to beg. This isn't about going cold. Smith wasn't cold. The man wrote a whole book about human sympathy, and we'll get there before the end, because that book is the twist that saves this entire thing from cynicism. But he understood the order of things. You can't give from an empty vault. You can't be a partner of value to anyone while you're standing at their door asking them to fill the hole in you. The desperate man says, "I need you." And need, sent as a signal, drops your price instantly. Because the invisible hand reads, "Need" as proof that nobody else is bidding. The strategic man says nothing like that. He builds a life so full that his interest in you is a choice, not a rescue. And a choice from someone with options is worth 100 times more than a plea from someone with none. Watch how this plays out in the smallest moments. The person running on need apologizes for taking up space. They thank you for replying. They soften every opinion in case it costs them. They negotiate from weakness in 100 invisible ways, and the market reads every one. The person running on real interest does none of it. They say what they think because they think it, not to get approval. They make a plan because they want to, not to lock you in at any cost. They can walk away from a bad exchange without flinching because their life doesn't hang on this one deal closing. And that ability to walk, real and not performed, is the most valuable position you can hold in any negotiation. Smith knew it about merchants. It's just as true about lovers. The one who can leave the table sets the terms at the table. And here's the trap. You can't fake this one. You can't pretend you have a full life. People feel the emptiness behind a performance the way a dog smells fear. The guy who's busy but checking his phone every 9 seconds isn't fooling anyone. The only way to stop sending the signal of need is to actually stop needing. And the only way to stop needing is to build something real enough that one person's attention stops being the whole point of your day. There's no shortcut here. There's only the work. Which brings up the strangest law of all. Why is the person who needs you least the one you want most? Smith answered that 250 years before the apps existed. Law 4. The paradox of value. Why the available get ignored and the scarce get worshipped. Adam Smith posed a riddle that confused economists for a century. Why do diamonds, which are basically useless, cost a fortune, while water, which you die without in 3 days, costs almost nothing. Think about how insane that is. Water is the most valuable thing in your life by any measure that matters. You die without it. You'll never die for lack of a diamond. And yet, water's nearly free, and a diamond costs a year's wages. The most useful thing is the cheapest. The most useless thing is the most expensive. The answer is scarcity. Water's everywhere, so its price collapses no matter how essential it is. Diamonds are rare, so their price soars no matter how pointless they are. Usefulness is one thing. Scarcity sets the price, and the market only ever pays the price. Read that again, because it's the whole game in one sentence. Usefulness is one thing. Scarcity sets the price. You can be the most useful person in someone's life and still be the cheapest. You can be nearly useless and still be the most expensive thing in the room. The market doesn't pay for how much you help. It pays for how hard you are to replace. Now look at the people around you through that riddle. And the whole dating world reorganizes right in front of you. The most genuinely useful person you know, kind, available, reliable, always there, always answering, gets priced like water. Taken for granted, barely noticed. Their devotion, the most valuable thing they offer, drives their price down precisely because they give it away so freely. They flood the market with their own supply, and supply destroys price. They're dying of thirst, standing next to someone who treats them like a tap. And the person who's rare, hard to reach, slow to commit, clearly in demand, that person gets priced like a diamond, worshipped, chased, overvalued next to anything they actually provide. People burn months chasing them and call it love when it's closer to a bidding war. Here's the cruelest line in the whole subject, so I'll just say it. In the market of desire, devotion given too freely gets punished, and scarcity held back gets rewarded. It's not fair. Smith never said markets were fair. He said they were real. And notice how completely this flips the advice you got as a kid. You were told to be generous. Give your whole heart. Hold nothing back. Beautiful advice for a friendship. Ruinous for the early dating market, because the market doesn't read total, instant generosity as love. It reads it as oversupply. It reads it as someone with no other bidders dumping their entire inventory on the first taker. The exact behavior you were taught was virtuous is the behavior the invisible hand prices at the bottom. That truth takes people years to swallow, and the years they spend refusing to swallow it are the years they spend being treated like water. But here's where the average person hears this and ruins their life. They decide the lesson is to fake scarcity, play games, withhold, pretend to have options they don't have. That's the cheap version, and it fails, because fake scarcity is a counterfeit, and the market eventually catches counterfeits. The signal rings hollow. The guy who's mysteriously busy, but obviously empty, is just water pretending to be a diamond. People can taste the difference. The real lesson is harder and better. Don't fake scarcity. Become genuinely scarce by becoming genuinely valuable somewhere else. Build a life so full that your time is honestly limited, because it honestly is. Then your scarcity isn't a tactic. It's a fact, and the market pays for facts. I learned this one through humiliation. I spent a stretch of my life as water, endlessly available, instantly responsive, pouring everything I had at the first sign of warmth from anyone, and I got treated exactly the way water gets treated. Necessary, maybe. Valued, never. The day I stopped trying to flood the market with my attention and started spending that attention on building something, a body, a skill, a purpose, a circle, my price changed. Not because I tricked anyone, because the thing underneath had actually changed. So the question's obvious now. If scarcity comes from value, and value can be built, what exactly are you supposed to build? That's the law most people never reach. The law most people never reach. Law 5. Scarcity is a position, and you can build it. There's a difference between being scarce and being absent. Most people who hear scarcity creates value run straight off the cliff into absence. They go quiet. They play hard to get with nothing behind the wall. They confuse withholding with worth, and the market, which is smarter than they are, prices the emptiness correctly. At zero, real scarcity isn't the absence of supply. It's demand that beats supply. Diamonds aren't valuable because a few of them are sitting in a drawer being ignored. They're valuable because a lot of people want the few that exist. Scarcity without demand is just loneliness. Scarcity with demand is power. Adam Smith understood price sits where two forces meet: what's available and how badly it's wanted. You can't build value by just removing yourself from circulation. A hermit is scarce and worth nothing to the market. You build value by becoming wanted, and then being measured by how you hand out access to a thing people genuinely want. So here's how a strategic person actually engineers scarcity, honestly. No games. First, they raise demand by becoming someone worth wanting, not posing as it, being it. A body that signals discipline, a mind that signals depth, a life that signals direction, a circle that signals belonging. Every one of those raises the number of people who'd value your time. You can't ration what nobody's asking for. Second, they control supply by having a life that genuinely competes for their hours, not a fake calendar, a real one, work that matters, friends that fill them, goals that pull them out of bed. So when they don't answer for a few hours, it's not a move, it's the truth. They were living, and the truth carries a frequency no move can fake. Third, and this is the part the manipulators never get, they stay warm. Smith never confused scarce with unpleasant. The most expensive experiences on earth are scarce and exquisite, not scarce and rude. So the high-value person is fully present when they're present, generous when they're generous, all the way there in the moment they choose to give, and then they go back to their full life. That contrast, total warmth, then honest distance, is the most attractive signal a human can send. Because without a word it says, my attention is real and it's not unlimited, and you're getting something other people would compete for. Compare that to the person who's always available, always reaching, always reassuring themselves with one more text. That person isn't generous, they're flooding, and flooding, as every market knows, is how you crash a price. So you don't need to become someone you're not. You need to get so genuinely busy building a life that your scarcity isn't a strategy anymore, it's a side effect. The most attractive scarcity on earth is the kind you're not even trying to perform, because you're too busy actually living to perform anything. And that points straight at the only investment that ever permanently changed anyone's price in this market. Not the clothes, not the lines, the thing underneath. Underneath. Law 6. Invest in the asset, not the advertising. Every market eventually rewards the real thing and punishes the bluff. Adam Smith said the wealth of a nation wasn't the gold it hoarded, it was its capacity to produce, its skill, its labor, its productive power. A country could be stuffed with gold and still be poor, he argued, if it couldn't actually make anything. And a country with little gold could get rich by building real capacity. The gold was the appearance. The capacity was the wealth. Now point that at yourself. Because this is the law that quietly decides everything. Most people in the dating market invest in advertising, the fresh outfit, the curated photos, the clever line they rehearsed, the borrowed status of a nice location. None of it's worthless. Advertising raises your price in the short term, but advertising on top of a weak asset is a trap, because the market always, eventually, inspects the product. The photos get a date, the line buys a conversation, and then the actual asset has to show up and deliver. And if there's nothing behind the advertising, the price collapses faster than it rose. This is why so many people are confused by their own results. They got the match, got the date, and then it evaporated, and they can't figure out why. The reason is simple and merciless. Their advertising wrote a check their asset couldn't cash. They marketed a value they hadn't built. The strategic person flips it completely. They spend almost all their energy on the asset and almost none on the bluff. They build the body, because the body is real productive capacity, a daily signal of discipline no filter fakes in person. They build the mind, because a person who's read, thought, struggled, and formed real opinions is interesting in a way no script imitates. They build competence, because mastery of anything radiates a quiet confidence the market reads instantly and pays for richly. They build a mission, because a person going somewhere is magnetic in a way a person going nowhere can never manufacture. And here's the part that turns this from advice into strategy. The asset, unlike the advertising, doesn't expire. A good outfit lasts an evening. A built body, a sharp mind, a real skill, a strong network. Those appreciate. They keep paying. They raise your price not for one date, but for a decade. You're not dressing up a weak product. You're building a stronger product that needs less dressing every year. I wasted years on advertising, optimized photos, memorized openers, chased the cheap, fast trick that would raise my price for one night. And it worked. For a night. Every time. And then it failed. The next morning. Every time. Because there was nothing underneath. The day I moved that energy from the bluff to the build, from looking valuable to becoming valuable, my whole experience of this market changed. I stopped needing tricks, because the tricks were only ever covering for an asset I'd refused to build. And there's a freedom in that you don't expect. When the asset is real, the fear goes away. You stop rehearsing lines. You stop refreshing the chat. You stop reading meaning into every delay, because your value doesn't live or die on one person's reply. You walk in calm. Not performed calm, real calm. The kind that comes from knowing that if this doesn't work, you're still fine, because the thing that makes you valuable is something you carry, not something they grant you. That calm is the most attractive thing in any room, and you can't fake it. You can only earn it by building the asset that makes it true. So don't ask how to seem more valuable. That's the advertising question. Short shelf life, brutal hangover. Ask how to become more valuable. That's the wealth question. And the answer to it is the only thing in this whole subject that's fully in your hands. Sit with that last line, because almost everything else here is partly out of your control. You can't control who was born attractive, who got options handed to them, who got a head start. But the asset, the body, the mind, the competence, the mission, that's entirely yours to build. Nobody can stop you. No rejection can take it. No bad year can repossess it. While everyone else is bidding their energy on advertising that expires by morning, you can be quietly compounding an asset that raises your price for the rest of your life. That's not a fair market. Almost none of them are, but it's one where the person willing to build always, eventually, beats the person who only knows how to bluff. But even a strong asset gets wasted if you deploy it stupidly. You can be valuable and still lose if you compete in the wrong arena, against the wrong people, on the wrong terms, which is where the second half turns from building your worth to spending it, from the wealth of the self to the strategy of the exchange. Because Adam Smith didn't stop at value. He explained how value wins. And that's exactly where we go next. So far, we've talked about value, what it is, how it's priced, how you build it. But value sitting in a vault wins nothing. A nation can be rich in resources and still lose to a smaller one that knows how to use what it has. Adam Smith didn't just explain where wealth comes from. He explained how it competes, how it trades, and how it gets quietly stolen from people who don't know the rules of exchange. This half is about deployment, about what happens after you've built something worth having. Because here's the trap nobody warns you about. The moment you become valuable, the game doesn't get easier. It gets more sophisticated. New mistakes show up. Mistakes only available to people with something to lose. And most people who finally build value go on to waste it because they never learned the laws we're about to cover. Let's keep going. Laws we're about to cover. Let's keep going. Law 7. Comparative advantage. Stop competing everywhere. Dominate somewhere. Adam Smith, and the thinkers who built on him, exposed one of the most freeing ideas in all of economics. You don't have to be the best at everything to win. You only have to be the best at the thing you trade. The anxious person's instinct is to try to be acceptable on every dimension. Tall enough, rich enough, funny enough, kind enough, interesting enough. A frantic effort to have no weakness anywhere. And that's exactly how you guarantee mediocrity everywhere. Spread across 10 fronts, you're formidable. On none. You become the human version of a product that's fine at everything and remarkable at nothing. And the market does not pay a premium for fine. Smith watched nations get rich not by producing everything competently, but by specializing fiercely in what they did best and trading for the rest. Same lesson, exactly. The people who win this market are almost never evenly good across the board. They're overwhelming in one or two dimensions and just okay in the others. The guy who's genuinely magnetically funny doesn't need to be the tallest. The woman who's brilliant and ambitious doesn't need to win every other category. The person with an unmistakable gift, a commanding physical discipline, a rare and obvious skill, they win on one tall column, and the market forgives the rest. That's comparative advantage, and it should change how you spend every hour of self-improvement you've got left. Stop pouring energy into dragging your weakest traits up to average. That's the lowest return move available to you. Take your single greatest strength and make it devastating. Build the one column so tall it casts a shadow over every gap. People don't fall for a balanced spreadsheet. They fall for a spike. They fall for the one thing about you they've never seen at that intensity in anyone else. I wasted years trying to be a balanced product, sanding every flaw, terrified of being deficient anywhere, and ending up unremarkable everywhere. The day I stopped defending my weaknesses and started weaponizing my one real strength, the whole thing flipped. I wasn't competing in the crowded middle where everyone's fine. I had a lane, and in my lane, the competition was almost empty. Understand why that works at the level of the market itself. The middle is where supply is highest. Everyone's acceptable. Everyone's fine. Acceptable is the most overcrowded category that exists, which means acceptable commands the lowest price, because there's so much of it. But the top of any single dimension is almost empty, because almost nobody's willing to pay the price of becoming exceptional at one thing. They'd rather be safe and balanced than risk being lopsided and remarkable. So they cluster in the middle, fighting everyone, and wonder why nothing moves. Specialization is how you leave the crowd. You don't beat the competition. You move to where they can't follow, because they were never willing to pay what your lane costs. So choose on purpose. Look at what you're already pulled toward, what people have always remarked on, what comes easier to you than to others. That's the raw material of your spike. Then invest in it disproportionately, obsessively, until it's not just good, it's undeniable. Let the balanced people keep sanding themselves into a smooth, forgettable surface. You build one edge sharp enough to cut, and don't worry about the gaps. This is the part that frees people. Once one thing about you is genuinely exceptional, the market stops auditing the rest. Nobody asks the brilliant person why they're not also the funniest. Nobody asks the magnetic person why they're not also the richest. One real strength, taken far enough, doesn't just win its own category. It buys forgiveness for every other one. That's leverage. That's a spike doing the work of 10 average traits and costing you a fraction of the effort. But specialization creates a new problem. The better you get at presenting your strength, the more the other side has to wonder what you're hiding. Because every market, Smith knew this, runs on incomplete information. And the player who gets that runs circles around the one who doesn't. Law 8. Information asymmetry. Everyone's hiding something, and the market knows it. Here's a truth, running underneath every date, every profile, every carefully chosen photo. Nobody has full information. And everybody knows nobody has full information. The whole market operates in a fog, and the fog itself shapes behavior more than the facts do. Economists who built on Smith studied what happens when one side of a deal knows more than the other. The classic case is the used car. The seller knows whether the car's sound or a wreck. The buyer can't tell from the outside. And because the buyer knows sellers have a reason to hide defects, the buyer distrusts every car, lowballs every offer, and assumes the worst even of honest sellers. The liars poison the well for everyone. Dating is the used car lot of human life. Everyone's presenting a polished surface. Everyone's hiding the dents, and everyone on the other side knows it's happening. Which means everyone's silently discounting everyone else's presentation, bracing for the hidden flaw, waiting for the catch. This is why the most attractive photo can get the most suspicious response. Why a too perfect presentation often backfires. The market's learned that the shiniest surface usually hides the worst defect. Too much polish reads as concealment. So, what does the strategic person do with the fog? Two things, and they're not what you'd expect. First, they cut their own asymmetry on purpose. They reveal one small, real flaw early and without shame. Because a person who openly owns one honest weakness becomes radically more believable about all their strengths. It's backwards, and it's powerful. In a market drowning in concealment, calibrated honesty is the rarest signal there is, and the market pays a premium for it, exactly because it can't easily be faked. The person who can say plainly, "Here's where I struggle," disarms the suspicion that's quietly pricing everyone else down. Second, they read the other side's signals correctly, instead of taking the presentation at face value. They get that what people show is curated, and what people do is true. And when the two clash, the behavior is the data. The words are advertising. The actions are the audited books. Anyone can claim to be ambitious, kind, available, ready. The strategic person waits and watches what the behavior reveals over time. Because behavior is expensive to fake and cheap to read, if you're patient enough to look, that's the discipline most people refuse. They want to believe the presentation, because the presentation flatters their hope. So they ignore the behavior that contradicts it. And they pay for that willful blindness with months and years of their life. Don't be the buyer who won't inspect the car because he already fell in love with the paint. And inspecting carefully matters more than ever, because of what the next law reveals about what you're actually negotiating for. You're not just trading attention. At the top level, you're negotiating to leave the market entirely. And that changes the price of everything. Pause here. A real question, not a rhetorical one. In your life right now, where are you trusting the presentation over the behavior? Where has someone shown you, through what they actually do, exactly who they are? And where have you chosen to believe the polished surface instead, because the surface was what you wanted? One situation. Hold it in your head, because the gap between what you've been told and what you've been shown is, almost every time, the exact spot your future pain is going to come from. Law 9. The free market versus the monopoly. Commitment is the closing of the deal. Here's something most people never think through clearly, and it quietly governs the whole endgame of dating. A free market runs on competition, options, and the constant chance of a better deal. And in the early stages, that's exactly what dating is. Everyone's keeping options open, comparing, hedging, leaving doors cracked. That's rational behavior in a free market. You don't commit your whole supply to one buyer when other buyers might pay more. But a relationship, real commitment, is the opposite of a free market. Commitment is a monopoly. It's two people agreeing to pull out of the open market and trade only with each other. And here's the tension that explains 1,000 dead situationships. Both people want the security of a monopoly while keeping the freedom of an open market. They want the other person fully committed while keeping their own options alive. They want to be the only buyer the other one sells to, while staying free to keep shopping. Adam Smith understood nobody grants a monopoly without a good reason. A market only closes when both sides decide the certainty of this deal beats the gamble of all the others. So when someone won't commit to you, you're getting a precise market signal, and you should read it without flattering yourself. They're telling you the open market still looks better to them than locking in with you. Their willingness to keep shopping is information. It says your value, in their judgment, hasn't yet beaten the expected value of everyone they haven't met. Brutal to hear, but it's freeing because it tells you exactly what to do and exactly what to stop doing. Stop trying to argue someone into a monopoly. You can't talk a market into closing. You can only raise your value until closing with you becomes the obviously better choice. Begging for commitment is trying to win a monopoly by pleading, Becoming undeniable is making the open market look like a worse bet than you. One's a beggar's move, the other's a merchant's. And the same law cuts both ways, the part people conveniently forget. If you want someone to grant you a monopoly, you have to be willing to grant one back. The market doesn't reward people who demand exclusivity while keeping their own freedom. That asymmetry is itself a signal of low conviction, and it gets read instantly. The person who wants total commitment while keeping their own escape routes open isn't negotiating. They're exploiting, and the other side, sooner or later, prices it right and walks. There's a deeper reason a monopoly is even worth granting, and it's why free markets and closed ones each have a place. An open market gives you options, but options have a hidden cost. Constant comparison is exhausting. It blocks any real investment. It keeps both people permanently replaceable. Nobody builds anything that lasts on a foundation that could get swapped out next week. A monopoly makes investment rational. When two people leave the market and commit, they can finally build the things that only become possible under certainty. Trust, depth, a shared life. The compounding returns of years pointed the same direction. The monopoly isn't a cage. It's the only structure where the highest value can actually get produced. That's why the right closing, with the right person, isn't a loss of freedom. It's the trade that makes everything after it worth more than anything the open market could have offered. So, when you finally find a deal worth closing, close it clean. Pull out of the market with conviction. Half commitment isn't strategy. It's the slow poisoning of the one monopoly that could have made you rich. But knowing when to close means knowing when to walk from a deal that'll never pay. And nothing wrecks more people in this market than the inability to do that. Which brings us to the most expensive mistake in all of economics. Law 10. Sunk costs. The years you already spent are not a reason to spend more. This is the law that ruins good people. And it ruins them precisely because they're loyal. The sunk cost fallacy. Every economist after Smith hammered this, because it's the single most common error in human decision-making. A sunk cost is money, time or effort already spent that you can't get back. And the iron rule is this: sunk costs should never touch a future decision. What's gone is gone. The only question that matters is whether going forward from right now produces more value than the alternative. The past investment is irrelevant to that. Completely irrelevant. But people can't stand this. We throw good money after bad because we can't bear to admit the first money was wasted. We sit through the terrible movie because we paid for the ticket. We hold the collapsing investment because selling makes the loss real. And in dating, we stay in relationships that died years ago because we've already put in so much that leaving feels like declaring all of it wasted. Listen carefully. We've been together 5 years is not a reason to stay. It's a sunk cost. I already gave this person my 20s is not a reason to give them your 30s. It's the fallacy working on you, dressed up as loyalty. The 5 years are gone whether you stay or leave. They're not recoverable. They can't be redeemed by stacking more years on top. The only honest question is the one the fallacy makes almost impossible to ask. Starting today, with everything you now know, does going forward beat the alternative? If the honest answer is no, then every extra day you stay isn't loyalty. It's a fresh loss, stacked on top of an old one, justified by a logic that would bankrupt any business that ran it. The company that keeps funding a failed project because it's already spent millions goes under. The person who keeps funding a dead relationship because they've already spent years goes under too, just slower and with more witnesses. Adam Smith's whole worldview was forward-looking. Value is about future production, not past spending. The strategic person trains themselves to think the same way about their own heart. They grieve the sunk cost honestly. This isn't about being cold, and then they refuse to let it dictate one more decision. They ask the only rational question. They answer it without flinching. And they act on the answer. This one discipline will save you years the fallacy would otherwise steal. Because the cruelest thing about sunk costs is that the more you've spent, the harder it gets to leave, which means the fallacy traps you deepest exactly when escaping matters most. And here's the test that cuts through it every time. Forget the years. Forget the history. Forget the wedding you already paid for in your head. Ask yourself one clean question. If you met this person today, knowing everything you now know, would you choose them again? Not out of comfort, not out of fear of starting over. Would you actually choose this today, from zero? If the answer is yes, stay and stop torturing yourself. If the answer is no, then you already have your answer, and every day you spend pretending you don't is a day you're stealing from the life you could have had instead. The past is paid. It's gone. The only thing you can still spend is what comes next. And the reason sunk costs are so devastating leads straight into the most uncomfortable currency of all. The one Smith's followers understood as the only truly non-renewable resource you trade. Time. Time. Law 11. Depreciation and the time value of everything. Your assets are on a clock. Now we hit the law nobody wants to hear. The one that makes this genuinely dark. And the one that, weirdly, is the most urgent reason to act. In economics, almost every asset depreciates. Machines wear out. Inventory ages. The value you hold today isn't the value you hold in 20 years, and a rational person accounts for that decline in every decision they make. Smith and the people after him understood wealth has to be reinvested and renewed, because static wealth decays. Nothing just holds its value by sitting still. A lot of the traits that command the highest prices in the early dating market are depreciating assets. This isn't cruelty, it's arithmetic. Certain kinds of value the market price is high when you're young are exactly the kinds that fade with time. To pretend otherwise is to be the investor who refuses to acknowledge depreciation and is shocked decades later that the asset's worth a fraction of what he assumed. But here's where the dark law turns into the most practical advice in this whole thing. The smart investor responds to depreciation in one specific way. They convert depreciating assets into appreciating ones while there's still time. They take the value that fades and they trade it, on purpose, for value that grows. Youthful appeal fades. Wisdom, security, character, a life well built, those don't. They compound. So the strategic person uses the high-priced early years not to coast on assets that are quietly losing value, but to build the assets that'll still be appreciating when the early ones are gone. The career, the character, the depth, the network, the self-knowledge, the wealth that gets richer with age, exactly as the surface gets older. They're doing with their own life what a sound business does with its profits, reinvesting the gains of the good years into capacity that outlasts them. And this reframes the urgency of everything we've covered. The person who understands depreciation doesn't waste their 20s or 30s in dead exchanges, in sunk cost relationships, in pleasing the market with cheap advertising. They can't afford to. They know the clock is real, that the resource doesn't renew, that every year spent on a strategy that doesn't build is a year that can never be repriced. This isn't a reason to panic. It's a reason to be deliberate. Time pressure, handled right, is just clarity. It burns off everything that doesn't matter and leaves you holding only the decisions that do. So treat your years like capital, because that's exactly what they are. Spend them building assets that appreciate, refuse to sink them into anything that doesn't pay forward, and convert, while you still can, the fading wealth of youth into the rising wealth of a life that gets more valuable the longer it runs. Pause one last time. Look honestly at the last 3 years. Were they invested or just spent? Did you walk out of them more valuable than you walked in, with a stronger body, a deeper mind, a clearer life? Or did you trade them for comfort and call it living? You can't get those years back. The depreciation already happened, but the next 3 years are unspent capital sitting in your account right now, and you decide today whether they appreciate or evaporate. Most people never make that decision on purpose. They let the years leak out one comfortable day at a time and only notice the loss when the statement finally arrives. Don't be most people. But if I left you here, I'd be lying to you by leaving something out. Because everything I just laid out, the markets, the prices, the cold math, is only half of what Adam Smith actually believed. People forget the man who wrote about the invisible hand wrote another book first. And that book is the twist that turns this whole dark study into something else. Law 12. The Wealth of the Self. What Adam Smith's other book reveals about love. Everyone quotes The Wealth of Nations. Almost nobody reads the book Adam Smith wrote before it, the one he considered more important. It was called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And in it, the supposed prophet of cold self-interest argued something that demolishes the cynical reading of everything we just covered. He opened that book by saying that however selfish you assume a man to be, there are clearly things in his nature that make him care about the happiness of others, and take pleasure in seeing it, even when he gets nothing from it but the pleasure of watching. The man who explained markets didn't believe people were only markets. He believed we're also bound by sympathy, the deep, automatic ability to feel what another person feels, to be lifted by their joy and wounded by their pain. And he described something he called the impartial spectator, the voice inside you that judges your own conduct the way a fair outsider would. Smith argued, the truly admirable person isn't the one who games every exchange. It's the one who can stand under the gaze of that impartial spectator and not be ashamed. The one who is, when nobody's bidding and nobody's watching, actually good. Now hold both books at once, because this is the resolution of everything. The cold laws are real. The market is real. Value, scarcity, signals, sunk costs, depreciation, all of it works exactly the way I described, and the person who ignores it gets crushed by it. But the deepest, highest, most durable value a human being can carry isn't a market trick at all. It's genuine character, real warmth, real sympathy for another person. The ability to make someone feel truly seen and truly safe. And here's the part that should reorganize your whole approach. That value can't be faked, which is exactly why the market prices it so high. Every cheap signal can be counterfeited. Confidence can be performed. Scarcity can be staged. Polish can be applied. But genuine goodness, held over time, under pressure, when nothing's being gained, that's the one asset no manipulator can imitate. And the market has learned, over thousands of years, to sniff it out and reward it above everything else. So the final law, the one that swallows all the others, is this: build real value, not just the look of it. And the deepest real value is to actually become the kind of person worth committing to, not the kind who seems worth it for an evening, the kind who's worth it for a life. The strategist who only learns the cold laws wins the early rounds and loses the war, because the early rounds reward signals, and the war rewards substance. The person who masters the cold laws and then rises above them, who understands the market completely and then chooses with open eyes to bring real character into it, that person doesn't just win the market, they escape it. They become someone the desperate calculation no longer applies to, because the value is just there, undeniable. And understand what Smith was really teaching across both books, because it's the same lesson in two languages. The cold one and the warm one aren't a contradiction. They're a sequence. You learn the cold laws first, because without them, you're naive. And the naive get eaten. But you don't stop at the cold laws, because the person who stops there becomes a different kind of poor, rich in tactics, bankrupt in everything that makes the tactics worth having. The full education is to master the machine and then rise above needing to exploit it, to know exactly how the market prices people, and to become someone whose price is high, not because they gamed the signals, but because the substance is genuinely there for anyone to inspect. That's the rarest position in the whole market. Not the manipulator who wins the round, the fully built person who doesn't have to play it anymore. That's the wealth of the self. And it's the only wealth in this entire subject that no one can ever take from you, no market can ever depreciate, and no rejection can ever repossess. So let's be honest about where this leaves you. You came in believing love was something that happened to you, a matter of luck, of fate, of finding one person blind enough to overlook your price. You leave knowing the truth. It's a market. It has laws. And those laws have been running on you your whole life, whether you understood them or not. You know now that you're always being priced, that the invisible hand reads your signals, not your intentions. That need lowers your value, and built value raises it. That the available get taken for granted, and the genuinely scarce get pursued. That advertising expires and assets compound. That you should dominate one lane instead of being okay at 10. That behavior is the truth, and presentation is the fog. That commitment is a monopoly nobody grants without a reason. That the years already gone should never trap you into spending more. That your time is the one currency that doesn't renew. And finally, that above every cold law sits a warmer one. That the deepest value you can build is to genuinely become worth it. Most people will hear all of this and change nothing. They'll feel the discomfort, recognize the truth in it, and then go right back to begging the market for a price they refuse to earn. They'll keep arguing with the invisible hand instead of working with it. They'll keep advertising a product they won't build. And in 10 years they'll still be blaming their luck, their face, their city, everything except the laws they were shown and chose to ignore. A few will do something else. They'll stop treating the most important market of their life like weather. They'll build the asset. They'll read the signals. They'll spend their years like capital and refuse to sink them into dead exchanges. They'll become so genuinely valuable the desperate calculation just quietly stops being necessary. This channel exists for that second group. Everything here is built to hand you the architecture the world keeps hidden, the economics under power, under attraction, under every exchange you'll ever walk into. Not noise, not comfort. The systems underneath. What you heard tonight is the surface. There are deeper layers, to value, to psychology, to becoming someone the market can't ignore. Most people will never go looking for them. And that's exactly why most people stay where they are. If that's not you, you already know what to do. Subscribe and keep building, because the market was always going to price you. The only question left is whether you finally make it pay a number you chose. Most will hear this and move on. A few will build. You know which one you are. You are.